What fantastic talks we've had already this evening. Very humbled to be in the company of such great entrepreneurial, socially minded people. I wonder what I would say tonight when I stood up here. I don't have a thing necessarily, but I do try and affect change using different ways to do it. So I thought I'd talk to some of those themes. But by way of a kind of 17-minute stream of consciousness, I thought I would start with talking about the state of the planet, some of the things I've seen. I am a scientist. I do explore very remote places. Significance of those is that if humanity's footprint is felt there, suffice to say they're felt everywhere. What I think it means for us, some areas of opportunity, what I'm doing, and then a few lessons from expeditions relevant to the journey we're all on. Whether you're a startup, organisation, or indeed a corporate trying to affect positive change. State of the planet, I think there are really two existential crises, if you like. They don't relate to what's going on in Gaza or Ukraine or COVID. They are climate change and damage to natural ecosystems. In terms of climate, scientists will always tell you we live on the Goldilocks planet. Venus too hot, Mars too cold, Earth just right. Venus about 400 Celsius, Mars minus 55, Earth traditionally was 14, now is more like 15, because we've raised temperatures by about 1 degree Celsius during the course of the 20th century. Got the highest levels of greenhouse gas we've had in the atmosphere for about 1 million years currently. Gives us about another 2 watts of energy for every square metre of the Earth's surface. Quite a sobering thought. Second issue, degradation of ecosystems. I won't continue in this negative vein for the whole speech, by the way, but I think the second one, it's important to take these things on board and accept them and then work from there and work out solutions. Second one is degradation of ecosystems, and I could rattle off a whole bunch of stats. For some reason I remember this stuff. 4.2 million people die of respiratory illness from poor air quality in cities each year. Going back 10,000 years, beginning of human civilization, us, humans, were 1% of the animal biomass of the planet. The others were wild. All 99% were wild animals. Fast forward 10,000 years, we're the 99 together with the animals that we consume. Pigs, goats, cows, sheep, chickens, and us are the 99, and wild animals are relegated to the 1%. Oceans are now 30% more acidic than they were beginning of the Industrial Revolution, because CO2 gets absorbed into the ocean where it forms carbonic acid. And in fact, 90% of the CO2 humanity's ever released into the atmosphere is now in the ocean. The oceans are not acidic yet, they're still alkaline, but they are rapidly acidifying. So there's lots of stuff I could throw at you in terms of the state of the planet with respect to those two issues. What's the cause? Zebra effect. I love it. I mean, really, it is overconsumption. I think we need to get this notion into our minds, not overpopulation per se. Overpopulation, you tend to be blaming populous countries, often developing countries. It's a convenient narrative for the Western world. The reality is it comes down to the amount we consume. I used to be the sustainability guy for a company called Arup. They're an international firm owned by the staff, 20,000 people. The fact you're owned by the staff means no nasty shareholders tell you what to do. So you can invest in pieces of thought leadership. One of the most interesting bits they did about 10 years ago now was look at how much land humans have taken from nature. For footy ovals, wheat growing, tennis courts, cities, roads, you name it, in total. At the time the work was done, it was 14 billion hectares. There were 7 billion of us. Divide 14 by 7, you get 2, which meant each of us got 2 hectares for everything in our lives. Education, clothes, holidays, food, cars, houses, travel, had to come notionally from 100 by 100 square metre pieces of real estate, 10,000 square metre pieces. That was our bit. If we were to be dividing up all the land equitably between all of us, not saying it's the right figure, just that's the way the numbers rolled. You then look how much we consume, and the places we often blame for being these populous developing countries with lots of people, like the continent of Africa, for example, they're on 1.37 hectares per person, well below the 2 if we were to divide land up equitably. South Asia, 0.89. I'm not suggesting we live lifestyles of those countries, but if we were to, there would be enough space if we lived with the footprint of people in South Asia for 20 billion of us. The problem is We all want to live like Europeans and Americans and Australians. We're on 6.5. Europe is on about 5.5. US, 9.5. 3 planets if we all want to live like North Americans. It's just a reality. Across about 80 different metrics, by the way, if you're interested. There's lots of data I could kind of throw at you. So overconsumption is the key thing, I think, rather than population. What have I seen? I've seen a lot of things over the years. I do go to the polar regions, as I've said, a lot. I've been to Antarctica 13 times. I'm only 26. Look what it's done to me. Terrible for your complexion. It's a big place. In fact, it's twice the size of Australia. The average ice thickness, 2,050 metres, times a place 14 million square kilometres in size. 1.5 times the size of the lower 48 states, the US and China. Twice the size of us, 3 times the size of India, 58 times the size of the UK, where I'm originally from, 14 times the size of South Australia, if you're interested, 12,500 times the size of Hong Kong, 20,000 times the size of Singapore. Average ice thickness, 2,050 metres. 2,050 times 14 million gives you 30 million cubic kilometres of ice in Antarctica's ice cap. If it all melted, we'd have 70 metres of sea level rise. Sobering. 97% of the world's water is in the sea. 8 billion of us survive on the stuff that's not in the sea, the 97, and the 2%, which is in Lake Baikal in northern Russia, by the way, can you believe? We survive on the remaining 1% of the world's remaining water. Incredible. What does all this stuff mean for us? We live in the most climate-exposed developed country in the world. Here in Australia, we have the highest rate of native species loss. We have one of the highest per capita carbon emissions, but we are also the most climate-exposed developed country in the world. We're starting to see extreme weather events. I think most of us now accept that climate change is well and truly starting to come home to roost. But what does it mean for us? What do we do about this? Good news is there's enormous opportunity for us here. We were talking before about the renewable energy piece. We should be extremely proud that here in South Australia we have the greenest grid in the world. It's the only one gigawatt scale grid in the world, I believe, that runs sometimes on 100% renewable, routinely on about 70, something like that. That gives you tremendous opportunity. And in fact, Australia-wide, which South Australia is the leader, by the way, Australia-wide we have to ask ourselves, with all this abundance of renewable energy, what do? Do we keep our own noses clean long-term and just try and nullify our own carbon emissions by producing a green grid powered by renewables? Or do we look to do some of the heavy lifting for other countries who can't do that so readily? So if we get our own house in order, we can solve about 1% of the global carbon situation. If we start dealing with some of what they call hard-to-abate sectors elsewhere, green steel, green cement, hydrogen, the opportunity exists potentially over time to deal with perhaps 7% of the global carbon footprint, which is something really compelling. Not without its challenges. There's a Net Zero Australia report tells us exactly what we need to do. $6 trillion worth of money we've got to attract by 2050, 160,000 new jobs, people who know how to work in this space. We understand exactly what the future needs to look like, but we know what we need to do. It's a very exciting time to be around, thinking about all those opportunities that might exist. In terms of climate, I worked in this space for a long time. I think there are 3 areas. There's mitigation, which is reducing impact. In other words, stopping making the problem worse. That's energy in homes, that's electric vehicles, eating less meat, reinvesting our money more sensibly. There's a whole series of things we can do to reduce our impact, stopping us making the problem worse. There is adaptation, accepting a certain amount of change is coming and making it easier for us to cope with, whether it's natural systems or people in cities. And then there's the big one, sequestration. Regardless of how many electric vehicles we have and how green our grid is, CO2 has a 200-year shelf life, roughly, give or take, a bit longer, in the atmosphere. We need means by which we can take that stuff out of the atmosphere. Currently, the ocean is doing it for most of us. As I say, 90% of the CO2 we've ever emitted is now in the ocean. We need to assist the ocean stop it acidifying. Landscape scale change is really where it's at. Tree planting, and very briefly, with how much time I've got left, one of the things I do is run a reforestation project here in South Australia, and we try and do innovative things. We work with the Nurrinjeri people. We train them up to work in the nursery and the seed orchard that we run. Seed orchard is a place where you grow rare native species in the ground, and then you harvest seed from them and you take them to your nursery, you grow them in pots, and you export them off-site to rebuild habitat in other places. We use irrigation software, which is very clever. It's quite cheap, so other people can do it too. We're open source with all of our information. This irrigation software basically has a soil moisture probe in the seed beds, tells the irrigation system when things are either too wet or too dry. If it's too dry, it switches the irrigation on again. If it's too wet, it says don't bother switching on. And it gives us optimal growth rates for some of these rare plants we're growing in this predator-proof enclosure. And then we harvest that seed, take it to the nursery. Some of the clever things we're doing there. Some of the Australian native plants don't break their dormancy and start growing unless they're activated by fire. How do you get around that? You can use things like smoke water. I see a few people nodding. Smoke water is water that has a chemical signature of smoke in it, and you soak the seeds in that, and they think a fire has been through, and off they go, they germinate, and they start growing. So there are things you can do there. And I've been involved, I know carbon offsets get a hard time, but I've been involved with trialling new techniques to enable farmers to get access to genuine carbon offsets that are really making a difference more easily by trialling that kind of technology on the property that I'm running at the moment. And the idea is not to save the world with it, but to showcase things that work and then use that to try and get other people to adopt some of those things. They don't have to buy into the whole piece, but they can take what works for them and run with it. So that's one of the things I know is called the Fork Tree Project. We're always looking for volunteers to come and work away tirelessly for nothing. But please do come down if you're interested or approach me afterwards. The other thing I thought I would talk about briefly is the expedition experiences. And when I'm not doing the environmental stuff, I'm sort of trudging around in the polar regions, or at least I always used to. And there are some really profound lessons I think you can take from the expedition experience that are really relevant to the journey that we're all on in the corporate world, or indeed the startup world as entrepreneurs, like many of us in the room are. I did an expedition a few years ago to retrace the journey of somebody called Ernest Shackleton. He was a heroic era explorer 100 years ago. His goal was cross Antarctica, sailed a ship down, got stuck in pack ice. Pack ice is that thick ice on the surface of the ocean that crushed the ship before they managed to make land. In the end, the only thing holding the ship up was the ice packed tightly around the hull. As soon as the ice moved apart, down went the ship. Shackleton and his 27 men, sorry about the gender bias, but back then, all men on those expeditions, he and his 27 men were just stranded. They all looked to Shackleton to find out what would happen next. And he said, "Men, today we'll go home." Wonderful line to use. How was he going to do it? The rest of it was the stuff of legend, this crisis leadership that he used to get people through it. And it's a very long story. I don't have time to tell now, but there are 3 take-homes relevant to this journey we're all on. We can take from that story. First is, he was a pragmatic optimist. Not an optimist, not a pessimist, but someone who understood the scale of the challenge ahead of us and planned accordingly. We know in Australia we could look at climate change as this esoteric thing that we're all scared of, or we can accept the fact that 40% of our carbon emissions come from the energy required to heat, light and cool buildings. It's not that difficult. We can make changes using technology like ROBs to make it cheaper and more efficient and less carbon intensive. It's fantastic, but we know how to do these things. Transport, we know it accounts for 15% of our carbon emissions. Again, we can make changes there. Superannuation. You know, Australia has got $2.5 trillion in superannuation. That's 250 times the purchasing power that the Green Climate Fund, the UN set up specifically to combat climate change, has. That's within our control to adjust. Go online, go to that little pie chart thing, and move the dial across to the green end of the spectrum. Chances are you'll make a lot of money. You'll be investing in Rob's company. You'll be investing in our Furniture Uber app, Cobber. You'll be investing things like lithium, EVs, all the kinds of things that frankly will make you money even if you didn't believe in climate change is an issue. So pragmatic optimism. Second thing I think is Shackleton had what we now call purposeful leadership. Purposeful leadership is about accepting that there's a difference between a vision and a mission. Mission's what you do as a company. Vision is why you do it. If all you've got as an organisation is the way you've always done things, it makes it very difficult to adjust and change your ways. That's not good enough. You've really got to have a vision, why it is you're seeking to do something. I talk to fossil fuel-based energy suppliers or retailers and say, what's your vision? They say, well, it's to supply energy to businesses to enable them to achieve goals and this sort of stuff. And that's fine. The vision can remain intact, it's just the mission has to change. But as I say, if all you've got is the way you've always done things, it makes it very difficult to adjust. So we need to adjust to this more purposeful way. Is it just about making money, really? Surely we can have a more purposeful vision piece. The third thing is Shackleton was what we call someone with emotional intelligence. That means you know who you are, your strengths and weaknesses, and you know that your team, in his case 27 men, they're all different. If you want to get them pulling together, you've got to understand they're motivated by different things. I think in this whole climate debate, we've got it wrong. We tend to use guilt and fear-based messaging a lot of the time to get people to change behaviour. Often you're implicating the person that you're talking to as being the person who's caused the problem, at which point they shut down. What about opportunity? What about kids spending time in nature, the developmental benefits for them? How good it is for their immune system? How good it is for us as humans in the reduced stress, the reduced cortisol levels you experience in nature, the financial opportunity associated with renewables. We need to find other language to describe this whole situation. When I redid Shackleton's journey, people said, how did you do it? We dressed at a simple level. We remade old clothes, ate lard, built a keelless rowboat and sailed across Southern Ocean. It was incredibly unpleasant, I have to say. Not suggesting we use that as a sort of a lesson for anything other than the fact that it was just difficult to get through. But people say, how do you do it? And how you achieve expeditions is the same as how you achieve goals as an entrepreneur or you achieve meaningful progress in climate change. Start with the outcome and work back from it with putting in place the things designed specifically to achieve that outcome. Most corporate organisations don't even know what their footprint is, to know whether the kind of continuous improvement-based stuff they're doing is really going to get them to the end point. It'd be like me getting in my rowboat and sailing off in the direction of this island that Shackleton was trying to reach, that I followed to try and reach, not really understanding whether I'd ever make it there or not. I put in place exactly what I think is needed: skills, people, resources, money, logistics, to get that goal achieved or give it the best chance of getting that outcome achieved. Otherwise, we're like Alice in Wonderland meeting the Cheshire Cat. He said, which way do I go? Cheshire Cat said, well, where do you want to go? She said, well, I don't know. And he said, in which case, it doesn't matter which way you go. A lot of organisations don't really understand that. Understand your own personal footprint. Corporate organisations, you've got to understand yours. Many other lessons. Break down the total into manageable pieces. Celebrate the successes along the way. Make it tangible. Problem with climate change, can't see 417 parts per million. 419 actually it is now, parts per million in the atmosphere, so it's not real. Humans are tangible creatures, need to see evidence. People like Rob Zapp, it's great, you can see the numbers, you can see the graphs, it works. You see relative change, you think, I do it. I find myself looking at the unit price of electricity and stuff like that and seeing how today compared to this time last week and give the kids a hard time and that sort of stuff. But it works because it's real and it's tangible. It really, really works. In terms of problems that you encounter along the way, you look at opportunities, problems, you fail forward. You look at positives out of every situation on your journey. Expeditions really are like startups. Nothing goes smoothly. You learn from experiences, makes you more resilient, and on you go. I don't know how much longer I'll speak, probably not much. But, it is very inspiring to be here in the room with people who have a thing, a startup. It's good to be here in the room with corporate organisations who seek to change behaviour. As I say, I would just urge that you start from the end, work back from the end point, and understand what your footprint looks like. Engage with non-traditional stakeholders. The latest leadership thinking is you've got to engage with maybe your competition, for example. Rather than competing with them, let's work together to work out economies of scale and most successful solutions to make things happen. I'm going to get off stage because I think I've sort of said enough, but I was always asked on the back of my Shackleton reenactment what the difference was between my journey and his original journey. And the journalist who asked me that question, I think, was suggesting we had some hidden assistance, neoprene underwear, Mars bars, GPS, that sort of stuff, when actually we did it the same way as the original explorers and suffered accordingly, and look what it's done, as I've said. And I said the difference was Shackleton was trying to save all his men from Antarctica, and our goal is to try and save Antarctica from humankind. Thanks.